I can tell you my love for you will still be strong after the boys of summer have gone. Cringe. In the early 80s, a standard was introduced, which is a new optical media format called the compact disc, or CD. This is one of those. And there it is in the jewel case here. And it's basically a disc with a bunch of pits and lands you can't really see. Well, you can see the camera, but yeah, there's a bunch of tiny pits and lands, millions of them in fact, about 800 million, if not more, on this disc itself. And it's basically a really long line of pits and lands. At least that's how these are made, the production CDs. But the ones that you can burn, the CD writables, so CDRs, CDRWs, they use a dye for that to imitate the behavior of a pit in the land, is to create the same sort of format, just a different way. And that's how recordable CDs are. But in the 90s, in the mid-90s actually, 1996 in fact, the VHS was crap. So they introduced digital versatile disc. I used to call it the digital video disc, which, based on what it's usually used for, you could call it that, but that's not actually what it's called. It's the same kind of size as a CD. If I can get it out of the thing, there we go. But it has billions of pits and lands this time. And this one, you can't actually see the really long list of information. It actually just looks like a mirror. That's because of how small the information is. The density is very, very high. And this has digital video, so like 480p, I'm going to use that because that's generally what you would use on one of these. 480p or standard definition video with an audio track, which I think can be lossless or MP3. So that's pretty cool. This one has lossless on it. Lossless audio and I think MPEG-2 video, but it might have been MPEG-4. I'm not really sure. But I ripped this disc, so I got the stuff off of this and put it into a file on my computer. So I no longer have to get out the disc every time I want to view the information on it. But in 2006, actually as early as 2002, I read about things called Blu-rays. At least that's when people were coming up with the standard. And Blu-ray, I just had a Blu-ray, where'd it go? Oh, there it is. Blu-ray is the HD version of DVD, pretty much. That's what people are gonna, that's the simplest explanation for why these came out, is because people wanted high definition or 720p or above video for their home purposes. So it's effectively 2 or 4 times the resolution, so it generally would look 2 or 4 times as good. And there's 720p Blu-rays, there were 1080p Blu-rays, but there's different kinds. Just like with DVDs, I didn't mention this, but DVDs, wherever they are, DVDs had different, they had different densities. Of course, it's an upgraded density from the CD, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about specifically DVDs that were higher density than a normal DVD. How they did that is they actually made different layers, and the first layer was like transparent, and the second layer is what would have another section of information. So effectively twice the information on the same kind of format. Of course, drives had to be updated for this, and they were very quickly. And there's a few more weird formats like DVD RAM, which should have taken off but didn't. Technology Connections has a great episode on that, or episodes on that. CDs never got this treatment, but DVDs, you could put more data on a DVD if it was the upgraded DVD dual layer, is what it was called, dual layer or DVD DL format, which effectively gave you twice the information you could store on it. People were wanting to put a lot more data on these discs. But of course, that costs money to manufacture the discs in this way, and I'll come back to that. So DVDs got an upgraded version. They got a second layer, but they also got double-sided DVDs. So I actually have one of those. That's actually what my parents put my, what I'm gonna call my baby movies on from when I was 1-2 years old. The first year of it on a double-sided DVD. It's like, of course, this is one side. This is one side. But sometimes you'll find a DVD that has information on this side too, which of course you would have to physically open up the player, whatever you're playing it in, or reading the disc in, and then you actually have to flip it over yourself and then put that inside it the other way. So that's cool. Now that held people, as far as I know, until Blu-rays came out. And Blu-rays, like I said, they're basically HD versions of DVDs. And how this worked is the laser could be more focused because it was a Blu-ray. It was blue light, which has a smaller wavelength, I believe, than the red light of a... Oh crap, I've forgotten how this works. I think Blu-rays, of course they use blue light, or DVDs use red light, and I think CDs use infrared light. I'm pretty sure that's how that works. And that's how progressively optical media got more and more dense. There was even a laser disc before CDs that was a vinyl record, like a black record from like the 70s, except that it was an optical media and it was as big as a vinyl record, but it looked like a CD. It was super weird. I haven't actually seen one in person, but I've seen videos about it. So yeah, Blu-rays, they're still the same size as a DVD, right? It's the same kind of thing, but the information is even more dense by like 5 times, which is pretty crazy. This came out in 2007, so we have CD in the early to mid 80s. We have DVD in 1996, and then we have Blu-ray in 2006. And one of the first players to get this was actually the PlayStation 3. So that's interesting. And of course, video games came out on these formats as well as they got upgraded, so the games could have higher detail textures and sounds and crap. So yeah, and I didn't mention the actual capacities in megabytes, but CDs are about 650 to 700 megabytes of data. DVDs are around 4.6 gigabytes of data, but the dual-sided, of course, it was like 9 point something gigs, but it was 4.7 gigs for each side. And then the dual-layer ones are basically like a double-sided disc, but without the double-sidedness of it. So but it wouldn't read in like a normal DVD player. You would have to put it in one that supported the dual-layerness of it, but you didn't have to physically take it out and flip it over to read the other information. So that's interesting. So Blu-rays came in 25 gigabytes. That was the first one in 2006. 25 gigabytes. And that was like for 720p movies and TV shows and stuff, or just 25 gigabytes of data. And if you wanted to store more, you would have to have multiple discs in the case. So here's the disc I pulled out a second ago. There's a disc behind it with like the second part of the data, and then here's the third part of it. And movies and TV shows that were put onto disc and sold on disc, some of them had to do that because they were too big. So 25 gigs, huh? Is that it? No. They made 50 gigabyte Blu-rays. So it's twice the information as the first iteration of Blu-ray, twice the data. Awesome. So it's 1080p. I believe most of the 50 gig ones were 1080p, but they were also adapted for data storage. So as I said, 50 gigs for each disc. And how they did this was, as you can see, it's a dual layer disc, BDR, so Blu-ray disc writable, dual layer. So just like for DVDs, you could store twice the amount of data on without flipping the disc over. Actually, I believe there were double-sided Blu-rays, but I believe they're extremely rare. So you won't ever find one. But there were definitely very commonplace dual-layer Blu-rays. You could store twice the amount of data on. I believe most first-gen Blu-ray drives, I'm going to use the word first-gen, even though it's probably not the correct term, but that's the term that makes the most sense. So the first-gen Blu-ray drives that came out in 2006 and onward, I believe they all had support for these. I could be very wrong on that, but I believe they did. And I only think that because of another type of Blu-ray we're going to talk about in a second, which is the next step. So like 4K, so UHD Blu-rays for like 4K movies and stuff. 100 gigs. I bought this disc just to show you guys. I wasn't ever going to take this out of the package. It's the same thing. It's 4 layers. Actually, no, I believe it might be 3 layers. It's 100 gigs. So we have 25 gig Blu-rays. We have 50 gig Blu-rays with two layers, and then 100 gig BDR XL Blu-rays, which are rated for 100 gigs. It's only compatible with BDXL optical drives, which of course are actually still pretty freaking expensive, all things considered. And that's just because of how expensive these are to work with. I mean, this disc right here cost me like 10 bucks, and this spindle of 50 gigs only cost me like 16 bucks. So that kind of shows you how much cost you're introducing to just manufacture and sell the discs. So it's just, the cost doesn't make sense anymore. And that's why there was only one more disc above this. There's only one more standard above the 100 gig mark, and it's the quad layer BDXL, which was rated for 128 gigabytes. I don't have one of those because I couldn't find a BDXL recordable version of that disc. I know they exist. I don't really have any way of knowing which ones are which because they're still BDXL and they might still be the same amount of layers. So yeah, the 128 gig one was the most ogurely Blu-ray that there ever was, and practically ever will be, because the cost of making these is so high. They only went one stage above this, and then determined that it wasn't worth it anymore. The cost was too high, and still is. I bought a Mac Pro just for ripping CDs and DVDs, and apparently it came with a Blu-ray drive already in it, so that was good, and that's why I think that all first-gen Blu-ray drives supported both first-gen Blu-rays, or one single-layer Blu-rays and dual-layer Blu-rays, because that drive must be decently old by now, and it still reads both of these just fine. So yeah, it won't read the BDXL Blu-rays at all. It'll just try forever and never work because, well, it's not a Blu-ray XL drive. This needs a Blu-ray XL drive to work in, which of course, actually technically we have one of, and it's the Xbox. Wait, no, we have two of. We have a Scorpio, which is down there. You can't see it, but it's down there, and that came out in 2018, and that's the first Xbox to support BDXL discs or 4K UHD Blu-rays, and I think it also supports games for that purpose as well, for, you know, again, higher res textures, mapping, sounds, stuff like that. So yeah, that's been my story on optical media, I guess. This is completely unscripted, so this has probably been very messy, and if you watched all the way through, you are a legend. And I'm so sorry. Just kidding, I'm not sorry at all.
I can't hear it, my stomach was going at the same time.